Welcome to Numbers Therapy, episode 36. Today's episode titled The Next Bull Meta, which is intended to be a little bit clickbaity and intriguing, and I think this episode will match that. Purpose of Numbers Therapy, as we know, talk through the macroeconomic, operational, financial, technical, trading-based, and other dimensions of Web3. We're putting the pieces together to help everyone understand the latest picture, to continue to elevate while also hearing some incredible backstories and having some good laughs along the way. For everyone that's live, if you want to ask any questions at all, even if you think it's an introductory question in terms of acronyms, definitions, please drop it in. I'm sure somebody else has the exact same question. And then lastly, Numbers Therapy is rated NFA, not financial advice, as in none of what you hear in here is financial advice. So without further ado, and on to today's guest and episode. As we all know, over the past year, we've ridden waves of hype and metas, bringing us content and art-based projects to pure PFP projects and even into gaming. Today's guest has a unique background, perfectly situated to talk about all. Having been on the forefront of the gaming evolution and revolution, and most lately in Web3, he's a perfect person to be able to talk through trends and segments across all these categories and equally talk through his opinions about where he thinks many of the current NFT categories are going. What I appreciate most about him as we got to talk, both about his current project and past, it was less about the project or projects, which are of course awesome, but he immediately led in with a top-down data-focused approach, talking simply to what the data is saying about how people behave, what they prefer, and using that to guide the business creation and then textured creativity layered on top. Is a really perfect balance of science and art, and I think we're in for a real treat today. Happy to have him as a new friend and equally excited to hear his viewpoints, which may be just a bit different than that which we hear in MVHQ. Hold your seats, everyone. It is going to be a fun one and packed with a lot of thought and care. Please, everyone, welcome Justin to the stage. Everyone, Justin, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Just waking up over here in Tokyo, so excited to do this.
Then extra thanks for doing that. I'm sure you're jammed and jumping around, and time zones don't help either. So let's maybe start a little bit top down and start with a bit of background for those maybe less familiar. Can you walk through everyone, pre-rise of Web3? What were you doing? How are you spending your time?
Yeah, sure. So I started off as an engineer. My background is in coding, and I started pretty young because my mom was actually doing engineering for the local hospital. So I had access to like all the sort of books and software at home and the old computers that the hospital didn't need anymore. And basically, when I was 19, I co-founded a company called Zynga. I built our first game. It's a poker game, free poker game on the internet. That was the game where we proved that social gaming would become like the next big wave. And we didn't realize it right away, but once we built the game, we started to see all these opportunities and making it easier for people to play together. And then eventually really figured out like how to actually earn money in these types of games where the game was free online for anyone to play. How do you sell poker chips and virtual items inside the game to be able to reinvest back in the game and make it better for players? And so, over time, we released stuff like Mafia Wars and Words with Friends and Farmville and Cityville and all these other games that were huge. I mean, at one point, I think Farmville had 40 million daily players. So it was almost everybody on Facebook, or, at that time, a lot of the people that were using the internet every day. So it was a fun ride. And basically we just reinvented the business model for games. I spent almost 10 years doing that. And then afterwards, I invested across a lot of different companies in many different categories. So I'm an angel investor in over 100 companies. And, I've been sort of playing around with Web3 since the very, very beginnings. So, advising the Dapper team since the CryptoKitties days and, working with the Immutable team since they launched Gods Unchained years ago. So, it's been a space that I've been sort of, investing in and advising in since the beginning and then building in since last year.
Amazing background. So before we keep going on the conceptual, the thought, the strategic, just my curiosity question, the name Zynga, where did that come from originally? Is that short for Bazinga? Is that something else? I'm just curious where that came about.
It's a great question. So the logo is a dog, right? And actually the dog was a real dog. It was a dog of the CEO of the company. my co-founder, and actually the dog's name was Zynga, and it means warrior princess. And actually, I think it's an African word for warrior princess, is the story. But basically, we were having a lot of trouble naming the company. And of course, you need to get a good domain, right? And we wanted to get the .com. This is like 15 years ago, so there were more .coms available. But the dog's name was spelled Zinga, and we couldn't get it. So somebody came up with the idea to change it to a Y, and we got the domain. And then there was a lot of hesitation on, do we really want to name the company this? And of course, my co-founder Mark, he was like, well, isn't it a little like egotistical to name the company after my dog? So he was very hesitant. So we printed out a sign and we hung it on the wall. And then, after a week, no one felt like changing it. So that became the name of the company.
That's amazing. I mean, it's pithy. It's only 5 letters, right? Like it sounds pretty solid, notwithstanding that one issue. So very, very cool. I know there was some backstory when you guys tested the thesis originally, right? And yours was free to play in the beginning, like you said, and then how do we monetize? There was some backstory there before. Can you talk about the backstory in gaming, what it was kind of structured like before, and your free to play model was evolution, right? Like it was a change in what the dynamic was prior, right?
Yeah, completely. So, I mean, think about it. All games were something that you paid for up front. So I grew up, buying console games and paying up front and not really knowing what you were getting. So you'd read the reviews in the magazines and try to figure out like what would be the best game to buy. And often they're like $50 up front, which is a lot. I mean, it's many times more expensive than going to a movie or something like that. And a lot of the reviews that were being written, these magazines, their advertisers were the game companies. And so they weren't writing like the most honest reviews on the games that they were covering, which made it really tough. Like you really had to buy a bunch of different games before you'd get one that was great. And so a lot of people forget this, but you'd often like buy 4 or 5 games before you got one you really liked. You're spending $250 up front. And a lot of people didn't want to do that, right? So the interesting thing about the internet is like most of these services were free up front, and then most of them were monetizing through advertising. And sort of this idea of like micropayments wasn't really a thing yet when we launched Zynga, but we started to realize that as we created games that were services, where the data and the users were kind of like building an account over time. They were building up their chips in poker or, the coins and the items they had in the game. All of these people were messaging us and they were like, they wanted more, right? And they were saying like, how do I get more chips? And we started realizing like, well, we could just sell them these chips and see what happens. So it was very organic. And we started to actually try selling them chips, and it worked. And we started extending that concept to more and more different types of games. And it's really interesting because there's some very early like Bitcoiners that were involved with the black market of trying to essentially farm Zynga poker chips. They would basically get a bunch of Zynga poker chips and they would sell them on eBay, and then they would agree to meet at a poker table at a certain time and place, and they would lose intentionally to you to give you the chips that you bought on eBay. And we had to actually. We had to prevent this because if there was a way to get money in and out, then the service could be seen as gambling. So we spent a lot of time fighting that type of stuff. But it's funny because like many of the sort of, I won't name names, but some people that you've heard of that were very early Bitcoiners that you may have heard of them farming in games like World of Warcraft and stuff were also doing the same thing in Zynga Poker. So there's a lot of interesting overlap.
That's really, really funny. I mean, we actually have, so one of our live audience members who's chatting right now was former poker player, tourney player. So I guess this is resonating with him, certainly with me also. I remember Poker Stars when that existed or was more of a thing. There was a similar-ish effect to what you're talking about, but that's like the ultimate validation, right? That people care about this and are willing to pay for it. So pretty excellent situation. I guess relatedly to that, has free-to-play evolved in any capacity in the sense of like, obviously what you have to buy into is that, the CAC has to be relatively low. The customer acquisition costs have to be relatively low for the unit economics to work properly to be able to get there. Do you think it's still the same formula? Does it require Web3 at this point where there's natural royalties and distribution? Like what's the current dynamic of free to play and what that market's like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Earlier on, when we first discovered it, it was really about having super low CAC, so the customer acquisition cost. And so we spent a lot of time figuring out how to make a game that could grow virally. And a lot of our games did grow super virally. They were games that, where we were putting in marketing money, but they were reaching, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people, mostly through organic marketing that was driven by like the game mechanics. So not only did people want to buy the in-game items, they were willing to work for them, and they were willing to play with their friends and invite their friends and share and things with their friends to get the items they wanted. So that made the CAC really low for these games. What happened over time in mobile is basically it became harder to do some of those viral tactics because there's not really like a good social graph built into mobile, which is quite surprising because it's such a social device. But for a long list of reasons that I won't get into, that hasn't really panned out. And things switched to mostly performance marketing. And so now it's not necessarily about how cheap you can acquire a user. It's actually much more about, can you just earn more from someone playing the game than you paid to get them in? And so what that means is that there are some games that are really good at basically, they may not be the most popular game, but they may be a game that people can spend a lot of money on and often do. And then they can afford to go and bid higher on the ad channels like Facebook than some of the other game developers. And so it really switched the types of games people were playing. Like we would make games on Facebook that everyone wanted to play. Like I said, 40 million people playing one game a day. Whereas on mobile, like there are no games that 40 million people are playing every day. It doesn't exist anymore. And the reason is because everything's become a lot more targeted. So it's much more about like finding the specific people that want to play a specific game and are willing to pay a lot for it. So that's why we don't see games that are as big anymore.
Very, very interesting. And obviously, if for everyone listening, this is a bit of background, right? But you can see at least partly where we want to go here to be able to talk about Web3 and Web3 gaming, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. I guess the one other, what I think I hear you saying now currently too, just to frame, is as a result of those changed economics that exist, right? Each individual user needs to be able to spend more money, right? Different segments. Also places increased emphasis on very lean startup costs and teams and development teams. Is that accurate? Is code just less expensive at this point and therefore it's not a concern? What's that equation?
I think the cost of production, they've gone up as quality of the games went up, because there's always a race to have the best quality in like a certain type of game genre, and that matters. But also having really good marketing matters. And so when you think about technologies like AI, a lot of people are wondering, how that impacts the cost of producing a game. And clearly it's going to make it cheaper. Maybe not in all the ways people expect right away. But there's going to be tools that we can use to get more leverage to produce assets, and art in the game and models and everything else. And even like a lot of the creative work that we do now, like we can augment it with this technology. But the thing is, like, to succeed in the App Store also requires just a very large marketing budget. And so even if we can drive down the cost of producing a game lower, that reality probably doesn't change. And so like if you really want to create like a hit game in the App Store, I mean, you probably need like a $10 million marketing budget sort of minimum at this point. And that's hard to do for like a small company, right? And there are exceptions. Like every once in a while, there's sort of some runaway surprise hit, but those are becoming less and less frequent as time passes. I think the App Store is becoming, a more mature market.
That makes sense. And thank you for teeing that up perfectly as we kind of move forward. And hence we find ourselves in Web3, right? Where you have the ability to test projects. Obviously still some development work has to happen, but the ability to possibly fund projects up front via royalties, figure out a community, gain a community, and then kind of mobilize from there. So I want to talk about your awesome project that you have going right now. So keen to have you walk through, the logic and the rationale of, what you're seeing with Storyverse and why you think it makes sense. Maybe let's start with what Storyverse is for anybody unfamiliar. And then if we could put the pieces in place as to, what you saw, why you thought it was a perfect time with all the pieces in place, that kind of a thing.
Sure. Yeah. So like I mentioned, I've been in the space with NFTs since like the earliest days, since CryptoKitties days. I even invested in like one of the first NFT marketplaces. It was the same time OpenSea was just coming out. So I've been able to watch it, but that's because people were basically pinging me about this from the beginning. They were saying, "Oh, this is like virtual items. You know, games are going to be a huge thing here. This is really similar to what you guys have been doing at Zynga." And so a lot of people put me on it very early. What I thought was interesting in the latest wave is like seeing a lot of the PFP projects really come to life. And I know that many of them were promising a year or two ago, like they wanted to build games. And obviously, like Yuga is delivering on that. But a lot of other projects weren't able because they realized like game development is expensive, it's hard, and they have great IP, but they don't necessarily have the same team to go and build a game. And so I think what Yuga did was really smart by partnering with, with Improbable and Imoca to go and do that, because doing it in house is something that's really tough. And so that was on my mind, like this idea that you had all these new brands and new characters and IP that people were excited about, and actually a lot of people wanted to like put them in games or something like this, but it was something that they were struggling to do. And so, well, we make games for a living, so I had some opinions on that and like how we might be able to make it easier. And we started to figure out like, how can we take all these this art and start turning it into real game assets? So like they're rigged and they're animated. These characters can move around, they can fight, they can jump, they can do all the things that characters can do inside of games. And then how would we take that and then turn it into something where we allow the community to actually go do very interesting things with these characters? And that's kind of what we got started on. That was like about a year ago. But where we've really ended up is at this point, Storyverse is a platform that allows you to create a new type of NFT. And this new type of NFT is a collectible story. And a collectible story can have all this blue chip IP, and it'll take in the people can basically bring their Bored Apes or their other blue chip NFTs, and they can license their characters into the engine. And then other people who are like famous writers or people who want to create an NFT collection that's a collectible story collection can use these now like animated characters to go and create an interactive story that's like fun to mint and trade, and basically is like a digital. So we've seen, comic books are huge. Why don't they exist more on the blockchain? And we think it's because, the format like isn't quite right. It's kind of hard to like zoom and slide around a comic book page. It's not really perfect. Yeah. And it has to be something that's like animated and fun and interactive for people to want to use it on their phone, right? Like that's the kind of like content that people want to use. And so we've made it really simple to make that type of content. And basically, if you're an IP holder, if you have a lot of NFTs that you have commercial rights for, like a Bored Ape, you can come and you can let other people use it to create content. You don't ever actually have to create any content yourself. And when they create the story collections that sell and produce like revenue, then you'll get some royalties from being a part of the creation of that content, even if you didn't actually create it yourself. You just offered up your IP. So this is a way for everyone to like finally unlock the value that they have in the IP that they already own. And I think that's been something everyone's been really excited about for the last year, but I think it's been pretty tough to do. So we're trying to match the creators, the authors, and give them a tool to make amazing content with a new type of NFT, and then bring the IP holders in so they can finally see all of their characters come to life and earn royalties while they do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. Thinking prior to this, like we've seen hints of this in some capacity, right? But it's been very disjointed previously, right? It might have been Jenkins. It might have been, seeing something about like the fast food chain that opened that had the IP attached to it, but it wasn't even licensed in that case. It was actually owned, I think, in that case. So like little bits and bobs around it, but not streamlined as well with a platform like what you're doing here, let alone the technology on top of it in terms of, the dynamic form factor you have of the video. So it's really, really cool what you're doing. I think, a lot of people, like you're saying, are probably waiting for it, super pumped about it. Before we kind of dig in a little bit more on this side of things, I have one curiosity question, which is, you had seemingly the perfect background of almost anybody to be able to ingest and buy into the concept of NFTs, right? Like why it made sense, given the gaming background and otherwise, right? Yet PFPs were not something necessarily that were a category that you touched before, right? So like when you'd seen that originally, what was your reaction to PFPs and how, how much they were flying and badge value and all that stuff? Was it reasonable? Was it totally ludicrous? Like where were you at on the spectrum there? I'm curious.
Yeah, right in the beginning, I was always interested immediately in the game side. So I think that's why I started, working with the CryptoKitties team early on, because they had plans for a game. And when CryptoPunks were coming out, like there wasn't a lot of interest in general for the collection. And so I don't think it clicked immediately until people actually started using them as their PFPs. And then I understood that because I spent a lot of time building things for social networks. So I really was like, wow, this is a very powerful thing. We thought a lot about avatars in games, but the fact that people would start changing their public or private like social profiles to use these images was such a powerful way of promoting the NFTs behind them. And so immediately when I saw that people were willing to do that, like that really clicked. And then the communities, it became obvious, like there were real communities forming behind a lot of these projects that were super interesting. So I actually really bought into this decentralized IP movement. And that's why like we ended up building Storyverse, because we think this is something that if we deliver on it, it's going to change the world of media forever. But there's like some really big steps to get there. And so I thought it was great that projects were experimenting with their licensing and CC0 and the types of license that Yuga Labs pioneered with commercial rights and things like this. But it's interesting to me because, as you mentioned, like there hasn't been a lot of places where you can take advantage of it in a scalable way. And if you look at like Disney or any company that has great IP, they make most of their revenue from that IP in entertainment. So that they may do merch and they may like do brand extensions and put the characters on different real life goods, but like they're going to make 80 or 90% of all the revenues from these characters generally from entertainment. And within it, they're going to make it from interactive entertainment. So if we can give people the tool to create interactive entertainment with these characters, like that's giving access to everybody who has the commercial rights to these characters to the majority of like the opportunity, basically. And it took a long time to build that infrastructure. I think that's why we haven't seen it happen yet. Like to your point, they've been focused on how do you allow people to license some of these PFPs, but they haven't been figuring out like how do you go and build a tool where the output is that anybody can show up, like a writer who's talented and creative, and make their own NFT collection with the IP that they've been able to use from the holders who put it in the platform. I think that's a new thing, and it reminds me a lot of like a platform like Artblocks. So we really look up to Artblocks, and we think Artblocks kind of solved this for generative art. So Artblocks, most generative art on Ethereum is minted through Artblocks' platform because they created a really awesome way for these artists to make it exciting and fun to sell generative art. And so our goal is basically to do the same thing. We're like, look, comic books are a thing. We're building a better digital version. We're going to bring in the best writers and the best creators in the community to create a new type of NFT collection using the IP that people already like. And there's a built-in audience and there's support because the IP that's used, sort of everyone gets paid royalties on it when they were involved in the creation of it. So we think basically like this model is the beginnings of, it's like, let's get the first version out of what it looks like to actually deliver on this idea of like decentralized IP and creating a new form of media. So we're really excited. Like stories start coming out this month actually, so it'll be a big deal.
Amazing. One related question that you probably have a very good pulse on. To be honest, I'm not perfectly clear on, but I know it's something that others have been thinking about. Is what is the current? Again, and I don't expect you to be an attorney. That's not the intent. But what is the current legal state in terms of IP? Because the sense I get across projects is some are more evolved, right? Like Bored Apes, for instance, it's quite clear what it is. But others, it's maybe not as built out necessarily in terms of what the IP rights are, and maybe there's a good amount of variance along the way. Do you have a sense or a pulse on like what the IP status is across projects? Do you think we're clear enough framework-wise such that it's consistent and implicit or explicit across projects? Is there variance? Like, do you have a sense of that situation now?
And I think actually most projects have just gone more and more open. So, things started with the commercial license that Yuga put out, and obviously they've clarified their stance even recently. So it's been helpful to see that, and they really have been supportive and stand behind like what we're doing. I think we even got like a retweet from one of the founders of Yuga last week when we launched our Bored Apes character pass, which is how you get it's a free way to get an NFT that lets you put your Bored Ape inside of the Storyverse so you can earn royalties. So I think they've been supportive of this type of stuff. And I think they know that if you build an ecosystem around IP, like all of these projects just become so much stronger. And I think we kind of got like stuck in this place where we thought the goal was a Netflix movie, for a lot of these projects. And that's an offline deal. That's not Web3. That takes a year or 2 years. It takes millions of dollars. It takes, a movie executive taking a huge risk on these brands that are very, very popular with like a sort of small crowd that's passionate about them, but not a large crowd. And so it doesn't necessarily, to me, feel like the place to start. It's not like the Web3 native sort of version of this. And it would be exciting. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'd love to see movies come out for some of these IPs, and I'm sure they will. But if we think about like what makes this space so exciting, it's like everybody's ability to collaborate permissionlessly, right, and do these things together. So I think that figuring out how that looks, like we may find that there's way more energy in telling these stories in a format that's centered around NFTs, that's like sort of for us, by us, than going and selling this IP to more traditional media companies like Netflix. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. In terms of the licensing, a lot of projects also got excited about CC0, right? So we've saw a progression toward more openness. Mm-hmm. And I think that you're right. Like some projects, they've got a long and detailed and thoughtful licensing agreement where if you go and read their terms, or if you dig through their site, you can actually understand the specifics of what they mean when they say they give you commercial rights, or what they mean when they say it's CC0. But not all of them have done that as detailed as they should have. So in many cases, you have a project saying you get full commercial rights, but maybe their licensing agreement maybe it doesn't even exist, right? And so you can take the promise that they've made, but you don't necessarily have like the document that really draws out exactly what that means. Most of the top projects have done a great job at really being specific. Naturally, like as they've grown, they've made sure their terms are good. And so, we're really focused on blue chip NFT projects for the next few months. That's going to be the projects that we're really supporting. And I think all of them are like very, very clear on how you can use their IP. And I think if anything, when we can get a platform out that starts making it valuable for people to be able to use their commercial rights to the NFTs they own, I think we'll start to see more clarity, right? Because this is something that it was exciting and it was a focus, but like it wasn't driving enough actual momentum in terms of like people earning royalties for it to be something that became a focus. And so, when we succeed, I think like basically you're going to see a lot of conversation around, well, what rights do I get exactly with this? Because it's going to start being more meaningful to people, right? If they're making money on this, they're really going to start to ask questions.
Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense. And I guess a perfect transition to that reward side of things. So how are you thinking about that reward side of things and how it works for someone that has an asset already that would fit the platform, with the form factor set up? How would it work at that point? If you could just walk through that a second or two.
Yeah, basically the way it works is we're adding support for different blue chip NFT collections one at a time. And so we started with the Bored Apes. And right now there's a mint open, where if you have a Bored Ape, you prove to us that you own a Bored Ape, and we'll let you mint a free character pass. And the character pass lets you put your Bored Ape into the Storyverse, so it becomes this rigged and animated asset. And now other people can create content and publish this content with your Bored Ape in it. And so actually, like, the platform is curated. So it's like art blocks. It's not, we have these tools that you can kind of like make memes with and play around and just create simple things. But the people we're working with who are actually creating real collections and putting a lot of effort into this to make something great, that's curated. It's not an open platform. So your IP won't be used in a way that's like, offensive or something. Every collection that goes out is something where we're working with an amazing author or creator to create something great. So there's not really that concern. But the way that it works on the royalty side is if you have a character pass for a Bored Ape and someone makes a story that's all a Bored Ape cast, you're going to get paid some portion of royalties on that story, whether your ape was cast in the story or not. So in other words, if everybody who has a Bored Apes character pass who offered their Bored Ape to be cast in a story gets paid royalties based on that story's performance. If your Bored Ape was cast in the story, say there's like 5 apes in the story, then you get more royalties, right? Naturally, because you're cast in the story. But everybody gets rewarded for in exchange for offering up their IP in the first place, which we think is really cool. So what you'll see is like a Bored Ape story collection will come out, and the 5 apes that are in it may split half the royalties, and then the other half of the royalties. And by the way, when I say royalties, I mean like the portion that's set aside for IP royalties. I don't mean like 1-to-1 from what OpenSea used to call royalties, right? Because obviously the creator is getting paid for the content they created, and then a portion of it is set aside for the IP royalties. And so half of the IP royalties would go to the cast, and the other half would go to all the character pass holders who offered up their apes to be in a story in the first place. So we think this is a really cool way of basically getting all the apes or all the people in a collection behind every story, even when they're not cast. So and it's exciting. Like we can, we know that offering up your IP itself to be used is already an ask, right? So by rewarding people for doing it, I think it just makes the whole thing smoother.
How sick is that? I mean, for everyone listening, going to listen later, like how sick is that? Like it's obviously making me excited in the vein of rewarding it at the several portions of the funnel as well, right? And considering each of those actions and motivating behavior and making sure it's good for everyone. So I think that's just, it's super cool. I really, really love the mechanism of that. It just makes a whole lot of sense. On the tool side of things, right? So you have this technology and this this media form that you're going to have the animated kind of comic videos like you're talking about. What does that tooling side or the tool side look like? Is AI potentially going to be integrated, or do you have a vision for how AI is going to integrate there?
Yeah, actually, I think that people are not yet aware of how cool the games that you can make with AI are going to be. And I think one of the first places you're going to see it is in sort of interactive stories. And the reason I think that is, so we have this feature in these interactive stories right now where you can make choices. And these choices are, they're simple, like multiple choice, choose your own adventure, like choices. So you can imagine you see a 1-minute scene, you mint an NFT for the Bored Ape story, and everybody gets the same first 1-minute scene. And at the end of that 1-minute scene, there's a choice. And maybe it's a murder mystery, and you have to choose, do you chase the suspect? You came on the murder scene. Do you chase the suspect or do you help the victim? Okay. And everybody who has an NFT has to make that choice. And when you make that choice, you have to wait for the reveal to actually see what the content is going to be and to see what everybody else voted. And so if we're in 1,000 NFT collection, we're all waiting a few days maybe for this author to drop the next scene, and we're all going to see whatever we chose. And basically that becomes a trait of the NFT. And so as the author releases more content and you make these choices, everybody's NFT becomes more and more unique. And of course, like, you don't know what other people are going to pick either. So you make the choice of like chase the suspect, and only 10% of people chose that, right? So now that's like a more rare trait. Or it may be that the scene that came after the choice that you chose just ended up being the one that people like more. And so basically, as the author releases more content and you make these choices, your NFT becomes more unique, and like the trading around it sort of like changes as the content comes out. So we think that's a really cool idea. But how does AI relate to that? Basically, some of those choices could be open-ended. And what I mean by that is, like, you may see the murderer in this murder story, and you may be able to ask them any question you want. And we have trained an AI to sort of be the murderer and to answer your question in character, and to, you know, reveal the right clues or not reveal certain clues, and basically help you along this murder mystery story. And so, you know, being able to interact with these stories, make choices, is going to be huge. And then having the ability to like have an open-ended prompt where you can kind of ask anything you want to a character in the game is something that's possible through AI. And I think we've already got some internal like demos on it, and it's super cool. It's so much more like, because they're not dumb like the scripted AI you see typically in these types of games in the past. So like they really stay in character, and it's fun to just like question them and try to figure out, you know, who killed the you know, who the murderer is, like, or something. So we've trained these characters to lie and stuff. It's been something that we've been playing around with. And really enjoy.
Amazing. I am personally love this. I mean, sample size 1. I don't even read comic books. I don't like comic books personally. Several people in the audience do, but despite not liking them, I'm in love with what you're doing. The new form factor, of course, the AI thing, whether it's in the beginning or later on, it's really cool. It's just really, really, really cool. One other comment too, by the way, before we go on, in case anybody in the audience is in Los Angeles. I'm in Los Angeles too, but I don't know the answer to this. Last I checked, when you go for a casting audition, if you're an actor and you don't get the audition, you don't get paid for coming to the audition. So if somebody can correct me if that's right or wrong, I'd love to hear that. But that's also just so dynamic about this platform and well thought out. Really, really, really love it. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit category-wise, still the case. Yeah, still the case, confirmed. Very, very good, Kento. Thank you. So yeah, shifting gears over to the gaming side of Web3 a little bit too. This is a hot topic, right? This is a topic that, you know, certainly in here within MVHQ and of course in the greater Web3 community has been one that nobody's had a perfect answer to necessarily, right? On the one hand, you have a lot of NFTers who, you know, understand the foundation of NFTs and why they make sense and ownership and liquidity and all those good things, right? And it's logical. On the other hand, you have Web2 gamers historically, right, who all we hear are kind of anti-NFTs. And that's kind of the premise that we've been given. And so there's this tension that exists about, are they ever going to tip over? When are they going to tip over? How are they going to tip over? You know, how is that going to happen? How are we going to get, you know, 1 million gamers on, 5 million gamers on? We have all these different games that are cropping up, of course, you know, all forms of different games that are cropping up. So there's kind of that foundation that's been in place, but I have a sense that you have an opinion on the gaming side of things, and I'd really love to hear about that. What is your take on, will Web 2 gamers tip over into Web 3? Is that the real obstacle? What's your take?
Yeah, there's been so much debate about this. Look, my take is simple, which is you don't need to win over those people, and here's why. So, like, basically, the story of what we did at Zynga when we created this premium gaming movement, we heard the criticisms from people who were playing console games and paying for games up front from the very beginning. They didn't see it as a legitimate sort of thing. They felt like, how on earth could, like, you pay money for a game while you were playing it? They thought that was the bad deal. And it's interesting because the reason they felt that way is because they didn't have to pay money while they were playing the games that they bought. But they would often ignore the fact that they spent $50 up front to play it in the first place. And so what you learned was that, like, most people who weren't in that crowd, what they understood was that they could play any of these games for free. And they could play as many of them as they wanted for as long as they wanted without ever spending any money. And if they didn't like it, they can find another free one. And if they really, really like one, then they could decide to spend $1 or $5 or more. And so in many ways, freemium gaming was like the most fair version of entertainment. It's like if you got to go to a movie and 30 minutes into it, decide if you wanted to pay for your ticket or not. I mean, it's just fundamentally more fair. It's an honest, you have to earn the dollars that you make. And so the sort of cynical take was like, okay, well, you're like tricking people into spending money on this game and they're addictive and they can't control their own impulses. And it's just ridiculous. Like if you actually talk to the players, if people go and buy Starbucks every day for $5, like it's easy to justify. If you're spending an hour a day enjoying something, spending $1 on it is like, it's a no-brainer, right? So a lot of people got that. And the other gamers, they never got it. And 15 years later, they still think it's stupid. And the reason that this doesn't matter is because basically what happened is that part of the gaming market became increasingly smaller, and freemium games went from something that didn't exist to a $1 billion sort of market. And now it's like over $100 billion every year are spent in these types of games. And almost all the growth that's happened in games in the last 15 years has been in that part of games. So when people talk about how much the games market is growing, it's not in this upfront payment model. So when you hear people complaining about the idea of paying inside games, those people in that market has like stayed the same or shrunk basically for the last 15 years. And so the point is, like, they haven't changed their mind and they're not going to change their mind, but it doesn't matter because they're the minority. And they're not the people that are going to be adopting NFTs. And so the people who are going to love NFTs are the people who are already spending money on items in games right now. And that's over $100 billion every year. And they don't own anything when they buy those items. They own nothing. And these games get shut off. And every dime they put in never comes back out. So there's a really simple reason I think those people are going to love it. And it doesn't rely on any of the complexity of interoperability or all the other things that I'm excited about. It's basically, you buy an item in a game, and right now you'll never be able to get any money back on that item. But if you just made one simple change, which is I buy the item in the game, and now I can sell it when I'm done with it. So ignore, play to earn and all this other stuff and the complex tokenomics. Just think about the $100 billion that's already being spent every single year. If those people could just take that item and when they quit the game a year from now, sell it to somebody else for half the price, then they just subsidized their gaming and their entertainment that they enjoy. And every single one of them is going to want that. And so you don't need to sell them on the concept of collectibles or NFTs or anything else. You just need to give them the ability to see these items as something they own that they can sell to somebody else when they're done. And then their gaming becomes more affordable, and they can think about it like any other hobby, right? Like you buy a guitar, you play for 5 years, you sell it for half price, and then you buy a new one, or any sort of hobby. And so I think that single sort of simple thing is going to be something that everybody wants once they realize they can do it. And that's the reason that this it's very, very likely to be big in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so that makes total sense. And to kind of reiterate that to some extent, what I'm hearing is freemium market, even outside of Web3, was already on the rise. There are already people that like to adopt that, pay for things inside. That's natural continuity that should exist here, right? Is people maybe want freemium up front, not necessarily pay to play, but they're happy to spend inside, from which they can extract some of the value back, right, as a subsidy to the next game they play. Is there also a rarity element that exists here, though, that maybe somewhat existed before, but still, may exist a little bit more in Web3, where you can procure rare items and there is the possibility to have that kind of profit motive a little bit more?
Yeah, but we were building that into games even a long time ago. So like at one point I was running, it was the world's largest virtual world. It was called Yoville. It had 7 million daily active players, and we had a huge trading economy. So you didn't own any of these items on a blockchain. It was just in a database, but we had an open economy, and people would they'd figure out the prices for these items, and we would make them rarer. We wouldn't guarantee it on a blockchain or anything, but we would say there's 100 of these T-shirts, and people would kind of figure out like what the market price should be, and there was tons and tons of trading happening. So I think a lot of games are aware of rarity and creating interesting economies. The thing is, you don't need to like convince people that they need to buy an NFT. I think what you really need to do is just basically take all those items that people are buying, and they just magically start becoming NFTs. Yeah. And then people realize, like, the game developers will suddenly say, hey, by the way, you've got like this inventory where you have these 30 items. Turns out like we did an integration with some technology partner, and now they're all also on the blockchain. And so like they're not just in the game database anymore. Now there's something you can trade. And so you don't need to convince people that there's value there, because they're already spending $100 billion a year. So there's so many different types of NFTs, like music NFTs, where we're really trying to find product market fit, right? Like no one really knows what a music NFT exactly should be yet. But this is not the case that games are in. Like, people are already spending $100 billion a year on items inside of games. And so if those items just become NFTs, then it just means that those people suddenly get some of their money back and they actually own the thing. So I think, like, basically it may take a while for people to figure out the best approach here, but it's something that every one of those users is going to appreciate. They won't be complaining about it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Does that ultimately mean for kind of like the UX upfront and the onboard that what that may look like is a similar sign-up process to more Web 2 games, or even an extremely low to no friction sign-up process up front, zero mention of anything blockchain, wallets, tradable, anything else, and only in the future, once you're at the point where you have the assets and you have something you want to trade or sell, does the wallet, for instance, come in, or anything with blockchain as an example? Is that like directionally how you think it'll happen?
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I'm assuming, right? Is that you'll get to the point where it requires no complexity of sign up. It's just the same way they're already playing. And then at some point they just discover, oh, there's a wallet here and these things are tradable. And you kind of educate them when they already care about the game. They already have a lot of items in it. I think that's the approach some developers are planning to take. So we'll see a lot over the next year. I also think, like, this whole idea of giving people their first NFT that way is going to drive most of the growth in the market. So we keep talking about, like, improving accessibility, and there's a lot of ways to approach that. And one of the ways that a lot of people have been thinking about is like fiat on ramps, right? And fiat on ramps matter a lot. It's hard to get your money into or onto a chain so you can go and, like, actually buy something and do something. But actually, the easiest way to on ramp people is to never do a fiat on ramp in the first place. And so if you can take either free NFTs or items that people already own in a game and then turn them into an NFT where they're not, like, having to pay on a chain up front to get it, and you're just kind of taking their existing inventory, well, then you just onboarded them without ever having to put them through, like, a fiat on ramp, right? And so what I think is really exciting about the space is I think a lot of people, their first wallet is going to be from that type of experience. So instead of the sort of common previous experience, which is you show up, you buy some ETH, and you start buying things, probably most people will start coming onto these chains by they have an item, and then it's an NFT, and then they have, or multiple NFTs. It could be from the game they were playing, or it could be they claimed a free NFT from a Super Bowl ad, right? Like what Digidaigaku is doing. But then they'll take that NFT and they'll sell it, and that'll be how they get their first batch of ETH. And so it's just a way more smoother and approachable onboarding for people. Like, you don't need to convince people to care about ETH and, like, explain what Ethereum is. You just tell them, like, hey, McDonald's is giving out a free NFT today. And, McDonald's used to have this really cool Monopoly game. I'm not sure if they're still running it, but you're getting a free, like, Monopoly token in McDonald's. Most people are just going to claim that. They're not going to ask any questions about what Ethereum is or anything else. They're just going to think they're playing this digital game. And then next thing you know, they've been onboarded because eventually they figure out they can sell it. And when they sell it, they get ETH, and then they buy other stuff, right? So I think that's going to be the path to mass adoption.
I'm 60, who's in our live audience right now, just blindly aped into the McRib NFT that you just offered up, right? So if that's not a case for what's bound to happen in general, I don't know what else is. Absolutely. So the next step that then happens, right? We onboard these million, call it normies, right? These non-Web3 centric folks. And it's kind of on the back end, right? Like you're saying, where they have these things, they're tradable, we educate them, that kind of a thing. Obviously, the next thing that comes up, though, is security, right? So how do you think that's going to play in it? Does there always have to be, especially in the beginning, some kind of custodial customer supportish element that exists in the event that somebody gets hacked, and obviously you're not going to get the asset back and they're not going to understand that? How do you think that's going to go?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remove the friction. So as long as that's something that requires some custodial stuff, then it's going to have to be that way. But I think hopefully what we see happen is education to get people owning their own wallet, right? So I'm hopeful that won't be a part of the space that goes away. And I actually think it's interesting because, like, one of the surprises to me about FTX and what happened there was that, like, a lot of the most sophisticated sort of crypto traders had a lot of their assets caught up on an exchange, right? Because they were using it to trade. Whereas, like, a lot of people who are really focused on NFTs, we're actually doing more self-custody, which is a little bit counterintuitive. Like you wouldn't expect that because a lot of people have always described the sort of NFT crowd as more of the mass market crowd, right? Mm-hmm. But in many ways, like the NFT crowd, I think was ahead on the way they think about custody. And so I think ultimately it's going to be a matter of education, but we'll need to just get people in whatever way works and not be too picky or, religious about how we do it is my take.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I mean, these are really all like phenomenal thoughts and so valuable. I'll maybe leave it with one last question that, not the simplest one, but a fun one nonetheless, that I think we could have a good time with. Obviously, at the current state, right, we're in a bit of a bear market. Got some macroeconomic things, rate hikes, all that kind of stuff, right? That's the world that we're living in right now. Over time, probably that evolves, that kind of a thing. Obviously, we've been talking about adoption and kind of the direction that has to go. Any thoughts in terms of what that looks like? Is this a 1 year post or 1.5 year post recession adoption curve? Is it to get to millions? Is it longer than that? What's your thought process there?
Yeah, I wish I knew, but I've been pleasantly surprised recently with like the amount of activity picking up in the space. So yeah. I think there's life in the space, and I know it's bad, like, and a lot of people are down bad, and that's not great. I wish it wasn't like that, but the space has legs. Like I've been involved with this stuff since the very beginning and the CryptoKitties days, and like there's been some very dark periods where nothing was happening at all. Yeah. And this is not that. And so I'll just say, like, if you haven't been through that before, then you should know, like, this may feel really bad, but like everyone's still building, or a lot of people are still building, and there's so much interesting stuff happening all the time. And there's so many big releases happening. Like, look with Yuga putting out Dookie Dash, and many companies like on the sort of cusp of some major releases. There's so much energy, and so like the fact that this new year started the way that it did, and things started to pick up again, for me is like very hopeful. And so we can't control macroeconomic conditions, and anybody who tells you they can forecast them is a liar. But we've got enough energy here to do something with it, and I think that is actually the thing I'm most excited about. Is it's not a repeat of like a winter. It's cold outside, but it's not frozen. And so to me, that's the thing I'm focused on.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Totally resonates. And a lot of the things that folks who are attached to the space and building are doing is would happen regardless of the macroeconomic conditions anyway, right? So I agree. I think that's a great batch of context, and couldn't have asked for more, in this episode. So really just want to thank you for coming on and all your thoughtful responses and really talking through kind of the logic and the detail. Really, really appreciated it. It was absolutely excellent. Everyone who's listening live, appreciate you always as well for all your fun commentary and questions and feedback. So really appreciate that. Everyone who's listening on the recorded, appreciate you as well. It'll be similar time next week. And thank you again, Justin. Really, really appreciate the episode today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun. And by the way, anybody, if you have like any questions at all, if you ever want to chat about something, just ping me. I'm super available.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Justin. Thanks so much, all.